Hi everyone. Welcome to the Lost Generation, outside of the mainstream. My name is William Hooker. I am a musician, poet, and part of this generation of artists. My goal with this podcast, which is being broadcast on its own YouTube channel and my website, williamhooker.com, is to introduce you to many of the musical artists that are outside of the mainstream and have made important artistic contributions to our culture. I have also interviewed producers of the music and many fans and supporters of this work. My guests are sharing what makes this art form unique and significant. I hope these conversations will inspire you to listen to the music, which may change you, and the way you view music, which again is outside of the mainstream. Today, I'll be interviewing Sarah Manning, saxophonist, composer, and band leader. I hope to be airing new interviews on the first of each month. We are presenting these interviews, and we have so many amazing interviews coming up that you will be hearing in the future. This is the Lost Generation, outside of the mainstream. This is a story that needs to be told. Sarah, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like for you to briefly tell us about yourself and tell us about some of your music, very briefly, so that we get an understanding of who you are as a saxophonist, composer, band leader, etc.
Sure. I'm a saxophonist and composer, and I've kind of moved away from more of the straight ahead scene over the years into more of improvised and experimental music in the last few years. And right now I'm working on exploring women's anger in music through a piece called Transmuting Anger and a larger multimedia work that I hope will debut in the next couple of years. That's going to involve a written score and curated imagery, and also the work of a journalist who's written a book about, or an author and activist who's written a book about women's anger.
Huh. And what instruments do you play?
I just play saxophone, and I just play alto. I kind of made a conscious decision, over the years. I briefly played the flute and experimented with doubling, but I kind of found that in alto, there's just so much that I want to do with the instrument. And so it's something that I'm really only focused on.
All right. And you did mention that you, prior to this, you did mention that you were originally from Connecticut, but then you moved to the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. Is that Oakland, San Francisco area?
Yeah.
The north?
Yeah, I lived in Berkeley for 5 years, and kind of got my start there as a musician, just playing around town. And I studied with Rufus Reed at William Patterson, and he connected me to Akita Tana, the drummer. And so I got to play with him a bit when I was in the Bay Area, and it was a great experience. And we had been talking about this before, about just taking time away from the city and urban setting, and kind of finding space in your life and then translating that to music. So for me, that was in the Bay Area kind of the perfect balance.
Right.
Because I would go out to Point Reyes National Seashore on the weekends and see whales and things like that. So I definitely miss that being in New York, but I try to find the space. The space is here. Birds and things that, you can, spotting hawks and just being in the park and all that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you just a general question, and you could take it wherever you like. Maybe one or two questions, and then after that, we'll explore some musicians that you may know of the 70s generation, because this is really entitled the Lost Generation outside the mainstream. Because I'm really trying to concentrate on that particular time in the music. And after that, I'm going to ask you about some of the things that you turned me on to at our session, which really dealt with the history of women in music. Mm-hmm. That was so enlightening for me. I had no idea what you were talking about. And I would definitely want to share that and document that as well.
Sure.
Because you really killed it. You killed it. I was like, what is she talking about? Who are these people? Mm-hmm. But you remember. Mm-hmm. My first question to you would be, what basically are you trying to express or achieve through the music that you play and write?
I think that I'm trying to see this as music as it's an ongoing process of inquiry. So I'm trying to, get outside of myself, and also right now I'm particularly interested in what would my music sound like, or what would music sound like without a patriarchal system. So what does that mean? Because all of the critique of music, all of the kind of gatekeepers, and all of the history and theory has primarily focused on men in the music. So what would that sound like if you're not coming from that experience or those rules, if you were? So I don't know exactly what that means, but I've also, I'm really interested in mystical surrealism, and particularly the painting of the painter Remedios Varo, who's a Spanish painter, and lived in Mexico as well. And she kind of grapples with, in surrealism, you're trying to awaken the unconscious or the subconscious through juxtaposing imagery in certain ways. And so you're dealing with the reality of the structure that we have, but you're also trying to get beyond it by putting things together in unique ways. So trying to take that idea of jagged phrases and different sounds of instruments and using that to kind of get at this different way of looking at things.
That you called mystical surrealism.
Yeah, it's an art. It's kind of a subset, I guess, of surrealism generally. Yeah.
Okay.
But the mystical part of it comes from inspiration from alchemy and archetypes and things like that.
Sure. And who again was the painter that you mentioned?
Remedios Varo.
Varo. How do you spell it?
It's VIRE. Yeah, Varo.
Okay.
So yeah, Remedios Varo, and she was, I think she lived to be about 50, 60 years old in the 1960s. And she has a large body of work that's really arresting. And I saw one of her paintings at the Museum of Women's Art in Washington, D.C. And then I sort of kind of went down that path of finding out more about her and her work.
Wow. Women's art. Huh. I'll have to visit that. I'll definitely have to visit it. What challenges are you finding as far as the musicality you're trying to explore, separate from the rules that really dominate who gets a gig, who doesn't, who gets recognized, who doesn't? I'm really trying to figure out from you, and we played together. What are those problems that you feel you have to deal with?
I think this is what I've loved about improvised music and experimental music in general is it addresses the problem of you want to still have history and lineage in your music and understand what came before, but also find something that's your own. And the challenge is how can you if you're thinking about shapes and texture, that's one way of getting around specific melodic quotes or things like that you might do in a more conventional setting. But it's always about conveying emotion, and trying not to use artifice, if that makes sense. So it's not being using tropes or just getting beyond cliche and all of that kind of thing.
Okay.
But if you want to get beyond like harmony and tradition, but also still be connected to something, that's a big challenge.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Do you find that as a barrier, or do you see that as a way to take you out of yourself? Because a lot of people, I would think that they would say, "Oh no, I can't deal with this." Then they just like close down, they shut down. How do you approach that problem?
I think that
there are many different ways.
Yeah, I approach it. I'm struggling to figure out how to approach it from a harmonic perspective, but from a sound perspective, I'm very focused on just getting a certain sound from my instrument and all of the capabilities of it. And the way that the saxophone is acoustically, the physics of the instrument, you can get to a place where with overtones and things like that, where you're emoting or you're pushing forward like a voice, what's happening, but you're not necessarily. You can get multiple pitches or sometimes at the same time, but also just different sounds with the same fingering on the instrument. So you can kind of transcend the instrument itself, but it's a challenge. Yeah, I think it's trying to just forget yourself when you're playing, but also be connected enough that you're listening to everybody else.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah.
And you're taking them with you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Taking us with you.
Yeah. Or they're taking, that's the great thing about improvised music is that, people will make a move and step forward and take it somewhere, and then you can go with them, or you don't have to, but it's
I got you.
It's always that kind of balance.
All right, now back to this patriarchal situation you mentioned. Because I, for one, think that I'm seeing more and more women really like stepping up to the plate. I'm seeing it more and more. Is this an illusion that I'm seeing, or how do you interpret what I think is happening as opposed to what is happening based on the road you're traveling?
Well, it's an interesting thing because I think that it's not that women are stepping up. It's women have always been stepping up. It's just that now more people are paying attention, and there's a certain amount of, just as our society is, obviously we're regressing in many ways, but we're also progressing forward. And so, just like you see with Congress, more women running for office. Women have always been running for office, but now they're being more successful, and that's bringing more women in to run for office. So it's women have always been in the history of the music. They just they've been ignored largely and not written into history. And so it's not that women have suddenly become more talented or interested in the music. It's just that there is more attention being paid, and then that starts to be kind of snowball. And then you also have things that are happening, just like with Winter Jazz, for example. They joined the Keystone Initiative, which is looking for gender parity in group leaders by a certain year. Key change. I'm sorry. I think it's key change.
Okay.
And so I think they're looking for a certain amount of over the years to have more women leading bands at the festival. So that's a change as well, because they're actively seeking out women who may have been on the margins to bring them into the festival, and then people are saying, "Oh, wow, that's great. Let's do more."
My question though, are these people outside the mainstream that they're choosing, or are they people that are basically have been given the stamp of approval of the men, or no, I won't even say the men, just the people who run this whole situation, and is that the reason why those people have access to those gigs, because they in fact have been given the stamp of approval by the writers of quote unquote history? How does that work? Right. Well, and how are you going to approach it? How are you going to fight back?
Well, I think that what's interesting about what you said is that you hit on something which I do think is true, which is that when you measure people, and this goes for anybody, it's not just gender specific, but when you're talking about people who are moving an art form forward, there's always people who are going to, people writing about Coltrane and Downbeat and, and saying horrible things about his playing. Because they didn't have a framework to measure it against. So if you're talking about a framework, you're right. There are always going to be artists who are not pushing the envelope, that are being elevated because you can point to and say, well, they sound like this person who we've already said is valid.
Right, I got it.
So, and that definitely happens to women artists. It's easier to be able to say. I mean, if you look at reviews of women, they often will say they'll, instead of taking that player's playing on face value, they're going to say, this is who they studied with. This is their teacher. And that's the way to validate them. So I think that there's always been innovative artists that have kind of managed to get through in some way or the other. Mm-hmm. But it is true that especially with festivals and just the industry in general, the framework is built on this one model that works. And you see this all the time with mainstream jazz festivals with, they bring in pop artists and things like that to kind of fill the seats. Okay. And so unless we challenge that and say we need to build a different audience, that's going to keep happening.
And that's what you're doing, I assume.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's as an artist, ultimately I just want to play and be myself as a musician and that path. But at the same time, remaining silent about these kinds of issues, it's not good either. So it's you have to. I've kind of gotten to a place where, I'm pursuing what I want to do as an artist and saying, you know what, I'm not going to just try to fit into this system the way it is, because I've done that for a long time, and I realized that ultimately that's not going to get me. The system's not changing, so you have to kind of get outside of it, and then try to go from there. So, but I have been writing and speaking about it some. I wrote an op-ed for Jazz Right Now that called out some of the sexism in the industry and also an experience I had with my former record label.
I'll have to read that.
But
when did it come out? November
of 2017.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And there are a lot of women who are doing more, but I think that the other thing is just, as you mentioned, it's we're as musicians, like, we don't have like an HR. We don't have like we're not corporate. We just hire people based on who we know, and like we're friends and things like that. And
who can play.
That too. Yeah. But if you're going and you're hiring just from your social circle, and your social circle is all other men, then you have to actively go out and meet new people, and men need to kind of do that to find these players, and it'll be better for the music as a whole because the audience will expand.
Now that's interesting that you mentioned that, because my thing is, how do you feel about the word hiring? How do you feel about that? Especially when you go to, as I try to go to another level of communication with the people that are in the group. Right. So when you're just how do you feel about that? That whole hiring, firing. I got this gig, and that seems to be an old paradigm.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that I think that also with improvised music, there is more of an egalitarian, it feels more democratic generally, because you're not saying here's this one person who's the band leader and everyone accompanies them. It's more like, everyone has a voice, and it's that compilation of, it's the collective is better than each individual part. So I agree with that. But I guess what I mean in terms of just when you're seeking out people is that I see. That you have to look beyond your social circle to find new and innovative musicians. And also I think that working with people who are decent human beings is also something that has been a learning experience.
Thank you, Sarah.
But that's the thing too. It's we're creating together, and that no matter how great somebody is as a talent, if they're not a decent human being, it does inhibit the music. I really believe that.
All right, we're going to take a brief break, and then we're going to go into the second part, which is my asking you specific people and you could tell me about their music.
Okay.
Not about them as personalities.
Sure, sure.
If they messed over you or whatever. I don't want to know that part. I want to know how you feel about their music, and that there are other people that you can think of, because a lot of times I ask people and they say, I don't know that person. I don't know that person. There may be people that you know of that you could turn us on to.
Sure.
And it can work like that. Zena Parkins.
I know of her, and I don't know that much about her music. So.
Let's see. John Paul Borelli.
Also don't know. So I feel like we're going to probably run into a lot of people that I don't know,
All right.
simply because I've come to the improvised side of music a little bit late. So I'm still discovering a lot of musicians.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Geez, I wish I had asked you for a list. Did I ask you for a list?
No.
No, I didn't ask you for a list. Okay. You did bring in Briggan Krauss.
Yes.
Would you tell me something about his original music? Because I know him as a monster player.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. Multi-instrumentalist. Would you tell me something about his music?
Sure. I think
Briefly.
I think that the way he approaches the saxophone is unlike anyone that I've ever heard before, and I think he approaches it with shape and sound and
tenor
texture.
or alto?
Alto. He doesn't
Okay.
play tenor,
Okay.
and I think that so much like he's done a number of solo projects, and he's working on a solo record at the moment. But it's all about taking this instrument, and oftentimes he sounds like a guitar. So he actually plays guitar in one of my groups.
Okay.
And what has been fascinating about that is because I hear his alto playing in his guitar playing. And he often does sound like a guitar when he's playing alto. So he's someone who's really taken the saxophone to a different level.
I see. All right. Let's see. Are you acquainted with Amina Claudine Myers?
I know who she is, but I don't know her music very well.
Or let's say Nicole Mitchell?
Yeah.
Have you heard her?
Yeah, and I think that she's. I don't really feel like I can speak to her music so much, but I would say that just the projects that she puts together, she's thinking on multiple levels beyond just. There's so much depth to her projects.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, when you say depth, how do you mean?
Just thinking about music in multiple dimensions. Like we were talking about this actually at our when we got together and played, but
Yeah.
this idea of titles, or like that the music
Okay,
itself
yeah.
can be informed by history or a cultural moment or something like that. So I feel like she's definitely an artist who adds those dimensions to her music.
You mentioned something at our first meeting that I thought was very illuminating. You told me about someone that was in Duke Ellington's band, and I forgot her name.
It was actually Lil Harden, and Lil Harden, yes,
Okay.
and she was in Louis Armstrong's Hot Five.
Okay.
And a piano player and composer, and she wrote. You can look up on Wikipedia now, and it's still attributed to Louis Armstrong. But she wrote "Struttin' Some Barbecue" as well as a number of other compositions, and it's only been recently that that's been attributed to her. So she's a very early woman who on some of the earliest recordings that we have.
And name some others that you know of that are in that historical, that are coming out of that historical branch of the tree that is about what we're talking about.
Sure. Well, Melba Liston is a
Okay.
trombonist.
Okay.
So she's a bit later. And then also International Sweethearts of Rhythm, just as a band, which is a big band that featured just women.
How many people?
Standard big band size. I'm not, so maybe
Maybe like
16.
15, 16?
Yeah, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and also, I want to say, I'm going to get my dates wrong, but this would be probably early 40s, but I might be a little bit off on that. So I will
Okay.
look this up afterward to find out if I'm wrong.
All right, go.
But we were talking about after World War II that when women took on a lot of roles in factories, but also during World War II, they took on roles in big bands, and there were actually many big bands in the U.S. that were all women. International Sweethearts of Rhythm is particularly noteworthy because they're white women and black women in the band.
Okay.
So one of the first bands that was integrated at that period of time.
And they're traveling?
They're traveling, and they're dealing with both sexism and racism on the road. So they definitely had death threats, and so they're really and what I find the most amazing about it is that I didn't know anything of this history at all, and I still don't know a lot,
Right.
because it wasn't taught in school. And when I say by school, I have mixed feelings about when arts are taught in school environments anyway, in academic environments, because of, there can be like a sort of theoretical analysis that is applied that doesn't really work.
I agree.
But,
I agree. Go.
but studying jazz and jazz history in school, and then not learning about the International Sweethearts of Them, for example, and these players that have been around for a really long time. So.
There's a person that I must mention that had a profound effect on me. Her name is Barbara Donald.
I don't know her. Yeah, I will have to look her up.
Barbara Donald was, you must. She's profound. She is profound. I mean, in the sense of her approach to the music, and she was totally outside the mainstream. Not of my generation, but when I first saw her play with Prince Lasha and Sonny Simmons and Charles Moffett, those people, she's the person you have to check out.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna think of others. Name a couple of women that you know that are on the scene now that you think have a profound outside interpretation of this music. I don't want those that are like, I could pick up downbeat and read about them. I don't want.
Sure. Well, Matana
Please.
Roberts, for example. Matana Roberts, for example.
Okay.
So she's.
What about her music?
Well, again, she's multidisciplinary. So she's a saxophonist, and she has gone in and done field recordings for some of her projects, and she also takes photography and imagery. She's done an exhibit at the Whitney called I Call America.
Okay.
So she's thinking about music in multi-dimensions. She makes collages, and she's always operated in a framework that's kind of outside the mainstream.
I agree, because she's from Canada.
I didn't know that, but I know that she's someone I deeply admire, and she's just also, I know she's lived on a houseboat before in Sheepshead Bay, and so she's had all these experiences that, to me, it's like this idea of living your life as an artist in every dimension.
Oh, okay. All right.
Every dimension.
We'll talk about her a little bit later, because I came across her with the Acid Mother, Temple Acid Mothers, I believe. What's the name of that group?
Yeah.
You know that crew?
I'm not sure that I.
All right. Well, that's a Canadian crew.
Okay.
Give me another one, please.
Well, I think there's a lot of interesting younger players coming up, and that are, again, operating in different frameworks. So
Give me those that I don't know.
Jessica Ackerley, she's a guitar player. She's also Canadian. I don't know about Matana, but she's a Canadian guitar player. I think she's in her late 20s, early 30s.
Okay.
I've been playing with her a little bit recently, and she's coming from the improvised tradition, but also she's also got a foot in indie rock and other kinds of genres.
Okay.
So yeah, and again, like someone who's like very interested in textural kinds of sounds from the guitar.
I have a problem with texture. My problem with texture is that usually people that play with texture, this is my opinion, and you can straighten me out. People that play with texture, they really don't know how to play. I mean, seriously. I mean, when I say don't know how to play, they're into this thing like this. But like, I've seen people be into this thing like this, like a Sonny Chirac perhaps. And when he decides to actually like play notes, he could do both. But there's these people, a lot of people are these textural guitarists. Oh, I'll give you texture. As soon as they say that to me, I don't want to play with them.
Well,
I don't know why.
Yeah, she's definitely not that kind of guitarist.
I don't know why.
She definitely could play. She's a great player, so she can play melodic, and
You
she's a
understand what I'm
composer.
saying. Yeah.
I understand what you're saying, and I think it's an interesting point. It's what it feels like to me is that I think that you have to have mastery of your instrument to get to a place where you can kind of get past that. You have to have a certain kind of mastery in order to be abstract, I think, because otherwise it's not grounded in the abstraction. Is not grounded in anything. So it's like, people always say you have to know the rules in order to break them, or something like that. So I'm not sure that I'm not like sure exactly how much of a particular rule system, but just with an instrument, just being able to control your pitch and to make as a saxophonist to not lose control, but sound like you're losing control of the pitch, or to create the pitch going all different directions, and you have to have a command of your instrument. Otherwise, it's meaningless, because you're just, So that's what I feel like we agree on. We're coming from the same place.
I just haven't met those other people that you have to turn me on to. Because I just mean meeting people like, I'm going to do some textures. And I'm like, please stop. But you see, that's my own. Give me another one, please.
Hi, I'm Kim. She's a cellist, and she's based in Seattle now, but she was here in New York, and she did some work she has an album on John Zorn's label, and she's an improvising musician, but she's also very rooted in modern composition, like coming from more, and so new music, and so she's someone who has, is just a really exceptional composer.
Interesting.
And it's also, I find like the people that that I really want to emulate or just learn more about as artists are coming from more of a holistic perspective. So it's not just one genre. They're kind of thinking about music or art generally in a more holistic way.
Okay, because I have worked with Okyo, and she's cellist, as well as do you know David Levin?
I don't know David Levin, but I know Okyo. Yeah.
Okay.
I know her playing.
Let's see. Give me another one.
You're putting me on the spot here.
Yeah, well, it's just that if I do those, and like, all right, then, I'll give you some. I'll give you some. And you could just say, I don't know. Right.
Well, no, it's okay. I can come up with some more.
Right.
It's like bass player Linda O. Like, you may have heard her name, but she's a
Is she outside the mainstream?
She is not as much as, but she is moving. But she is moving. See, this is where a lot of people are moving into the outside of the mainstream. So she comes from more of the mainstream.
Why did you think that?
She's been playing more at the Stone and places, where there is a little bit more experimentation. Why do you think people are moving outside the mainstream?
Well, is it because all of a sudden they realize that they can pay the rent, so maybe I'll take chances? And some people, they just start off taking chances, like a Will Connell. I'm just going to take chances. I don't care. You see, I respect that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that there has been, I do pay attention somewhat to some of the mainstream magazines about jazz, and I am seeing more interest in music that is outside the mainstream. In some more than I have before, which is not necessarily like any kind of sea change in the music.
Okay.
But I do find it really interesting that, for example, Nels Cline, the guitar player, who's in Wilco, so he's in a very mainstream band, like his idea of, like, at least in my mind, of the most fulfilling situation to play in is to play for 20 people at the Stone when he's on touring on big stages the rest of the time. So I think that, we're all doing what we can. So it's we have to, some people, it's not necessarily, I don't know, I've made the decision that I don't want to play restaurant gigs anymore partly because it wasn't fulfilling, but partly also because I just got to a point where I'm not a player who's going to go in and be able to, like, just step into that role. And so it's sort of that decision is made. I'm not a chameleon as a player.
Okay.
So,
okay.
and I think that players who are more like that it's easier for them to fulfill multiple roles, and why not, play some more mainstream music to pay the rent.
I hear you.
But I think for me, it's not something that, I feel like I always stick out, sound wise. I'm not going to be able to just hop on the recording and play the, okay, let's
We're
play
gonna
this,
detect
the
you.
1970s style saxophone solo, and this, that's just not me.
All right then. Okay. All right. Good.
But I don't fault players who can do that and then step out. So yeah, because we're all just trying to make it work somehow.
Well, talking with you is very illuminating for me, because I guess it's because I'd like to see people that are challenging my way of thinking, and also challenging my own mindset, opening my mind up to what's going on out here as well. And I gotta say, I really do hope that you and I can be playing more together.
That would be wonderful.
And you're going to be introducing me to people that you know. I'll introduce you to people that I know. And we continue this dialogue about what this present time means for both of us.
Yeah.
Because it's very important. There's a lot of things going on in terms of the world, the vibe that's happening in this music, who's coming into the music, who's choosing not to stay set and sedentary, and we just have to keep it moving forward. And I really am glad that I think that you're one of the people that's going to help do that.
Well, thank you. I think we all need to work together and just have these conversations, because the last thing we need is, when there's so much against the music generally,
Right.
the last thing, artists talking amongst themselves is the most powerful thing that can be done. Yeah.
Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. In months ahead, you will have the opportunity to hear from many more Lost Generation artists and supporters. The audio-only version is available wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to hear upcoming episodes.